Welcome to Zero to Solopreneur. My name is Alex Montes and
I'm Gabe Alvarez.
So we're here to talk to amazing entrepreneurs about their journey into solopreneurship, why they decided to go into solopreneurship, and some of the back-end scenes into what's happening there. Today we have a very special guest. His name is Mason Cosby. He is the founder of Scrappy ABM. Prior to Scrappy ABM, he was a director of marketing at Gravity Global, and he has tons of marketing experience. He's a podcast host. He is a LinkedIn influencer, if he wants to call himself that. I never kind of heard him saying that. And he's just an amazing human being. I think I really enjoy listening or reading his posts about his family, about what's going on in the world. But most importantly, he's an amazing marketer and entrepreneur. And we're so lucky to have him here today. So Mason, why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself and add to this introduction?
I mean, you've already inflated my head too large. I'm not going to be able to walk through a door for the next couple of hours. I don't think there's anything else to add. You kind of covered off on it. I'm excited to be here and honored to be a guest.
Thank you so much for being here. Maybe, Gabe, you want to get us started?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks again, Mason. So Mason, we brought you on, but we definitely want to talk about your business. We want to talk about Scrappy ABM. So can you tell us about the inspiration behind creating Scrappy ABM? And, was there a specific moment where you thought, hey, this is something that I could scale up and I could grow and I'm passionate about, that you could think about?
Yeah, I mean, I can share where really the concept of Scrappy ABM came from. And then when I was like, oh, I think this has got some legs, is I was just talking about my own past experience working Gravity Global and how I was using social selling and was able to verifiably within the course of a year through LinkedIn source $750,000 in revenue. And the playbook that I had run through LinkedIn was connecting with your target accounts, engaging with their content, creating content that'd be valuable for them. So I took the concept of just creating social content and I turned it into an account-based marketing play. And it costs no money in technology. People think I'm crazy. I've never actually had a LinkedIn premium account. I just used the free account because I'm scrappy in that way. And when I shared that and I called it Scrappy ABM because it was kind of off the cuff, the post really blew up and I was like, oh, that's cool. And then I just kind of went about, the rest of my day and week, and a couple weeks had gone by and the post kept going and I ended up having people reach out and were like, hey, this is really cool. Can you share that playbook? So I shared the playbook and started seeing other people. I don't know if you guys know Ryan Gunn. He's over at a company called Aptitude 8. He was actually, before he moved to Aptitude, he was a client, Mojo Media Labs and Gravity Global. And he and I connected and he actually took the playbook and ran with it. And now I'm seeing people like Ryan that have taken the playbook and really been very successful with it. I was like, shoot, it's kind of working. And so I then Googled Scrappy ABM and the number one search result was my dumb LinkedIn post. And I was like, okay, I should own this. I should try to capitalize on this concept because it's resonating and people are using the playbooks that I've built and they're actually also seeing results. So it's not just a Mason Cosby one-off, this is repeatable. So that's when I went and built the website. I launched the podcast and I did everything I could as quickly as possible to own that space of Scrappy ABM.
All right. So you saw an opportunity. And at what point did you decide, okay, there's something to Scrappy ABM. There's some demand for this service. It looks like there's some product market fit. But at what point do you feel like, okay, I'm going to go all in on this?
No, that's a great question. And it was when I launched the podcast. I made a post and said, hey, this is something I'm doing now. I hadn't left my full-time day job at that point, and I ended up launching it in July. And then I had about a $750,000 pipeline by the end of August, and I had already closed about $200,000 in revenue. At that point, I was astounded, to be very clear. I had not anticipated that level of an influx. And I also want to give context, in that time frame, my daughter was born. So I was not even working on this super full time. It was just kind of something I was kind of doing, if I'm being honest. I hadn't dedicated a ton of time to it because I was also trying to be present for my wife and be present for my daughter that had just been born. But again, kind of halfway doing it. I had a lot of people that were just filling out request forms and I ended up closing deals. And the other thing is, it wasn't I had a couple of people that were, I would say, friendlies, but they were people that I had never hopped on a call with that said, hey, I've been following your LinkedIn content, or I had an SEO deal closed. That was just like, I was Googling ABM services and I found you and I'd like to work with you. And it was like a 2-call close.
Wow.
So like when those things start happening, and it's not just, oh, I want to work with Mason Cosby, but it's like, I like the brand and what you're talking about. I don't know who you are. I don't care who you are, honestly, which is like, I know it sounds odd, but like when they don't care about me as a person, they care about the brand message, and they feel validated by the brand message. That's where I was like, okay, there's more to this than like friends that are nice or people that have followed me for a few years. Like, this has the potential to really be a business.
I love the name Scrappy ABM, right? Because I think when you think about me as a marketer, I think, you know, when I'm tasked with like, hey, can you go do an ABM campaign, or can we launch this? It's always, you know, you can Google it, but the software that comes with it is just, you know, super expensive, right? To get in front of these people. And, you know, the next thing that, you know, those above me say is like, hey, can you be scrappy? Like, so it fits super well, where it's like, you know, the way that us marketers who don't have like huge budgets, who don't like, it's part of our lifestyle, right? Like, it's just part of our work, right? We have to be scrappy. We have to look at these things. And that's awesome, because that fits right into like my Google search. How can I be scrappy with an ABM campaign? Anyway, Mason, so I have a question, because we get into like the challenges, right? I know prior to hitting the record button, we were talking about some of the recent challenges you've had, but talk to us about like things that some people may be interested in hearing, and other things you may be wanting to talk about that most folks who are starting their own thing don't know or need to know.
Yeah, I mean, so when I launched Scrappy ABM, there really weren't products. It was just like, I'm going to do this thing. It's a concept. You can like work with me. And then I ended up going and asking some other people in the ABM space that had specific niches. So like, I had someone that had worked in some pretty significant organizations that were publicly traded, multi-billion-dollar companies. So like I brought her in to do like enterprise ABM. And then I had another person that was like all about customer marketing. I had another person that was all about partnerships. I had another person that was all about like operations. So I ended up building this like elite team of like 6 people, and they were all on a straight commission approach. And like the greatest challenge with that is 2 things. One, I brought too many people in too quickly, because within about a month and a half, because when I launched Scrappy ABM, honestly, it was intended to be a side hustle. Like, I hadn't planned on it being a full time. So I was kind of like, honestly, really cool with the idea that it would be, for lack of a word, like a company in which I provided legal, finance, sales, and marketing to help these other people close deals that they wouldn't want to do. Like, that was totally fine with that. And that was going to be the brand. And it was like going to be a people-led brand. And there were 2 challenges that I ran into. One, there was a difficulty in the idea of selling people versus a process, because things would sometimes happen. Like, I was selling the idea of working with this person, and then like that person would say something to the extent of like, I don't really want to work on that account because I have these other reasons, or that's going to be like too much that I can't handle. So I ended up getting pretty deep in the sales process. And then I'd have to go back to the customer and say like, I'm sorry, you can't work with this person, but you could work with this person. But like, I had just spent numerous calls building up and hyping up that person. And then the other side is like, from my perspective of where I failed is I changed the expectation frequently, because the business was growing. So like, they were bought into one version of Scrappy ABM, then 2 weeks would go by and the business had changed. And like, that's my bad. And if I would go back and do things differently, and this is what I'm doing right now, is because there was a point where I was like, quote unquote, working with, and nobody was getting paid because the deals hadn't closed yet, but I was quote unquote working with like 9 people. I had signed like 20 referral partnerships because I was like, let's grow this thing. And like, I'm now at the point where I'm like, I think what I want is to hire on one person that like I get to full capacity, and then I hire another person. I'm doing like contract to hire. So I'm not spreading all of my deals super thin. I'm like, these are the processes that we run. And then these are the roles that then fill these processes. So we have great talent, so that when I'm selling a process versus selling a person, it actually creates better scale. It creates better understanding, because I'm not promising you're going to work with anyone in particular. I'm promising we're going to deliver results based on the process that we've developed. So again, it's created a much more scalable way. And the other thing is, to put it really simply, of like, there's no longer these questions of like, okay, so what exactly does Scrappy ABM do? Because again, I was doing customer marketing, I was doing enterprise ABM, I was doing partnerships, I was doing operations. I was doing go-to-market strategy and not really doing any of them. So instead, I do ABM pilot programs, I do sales activation plays, and we do podcasting. Those are the three things that we do. And we've got great processes baked out so that we can actually sell and scale with ease. So that was like the biggest mistake. And then how I'm now trying to solve for it. And like, I talked with a fair number of other entrepreneurs and solopreneurs that are like, the challenge is always trying to bring in more contractors too quickly. Because I have people that were friends that were laid off. They're like, Mason, you're growing. Like, do you have anything that I can work on? And again, I'm now starting to spread myself too thin, trying to manage all these different contractors versus going deep with just a few contractors, really making them have a great living. And then actually ramping those to potentially be W-2 employees or whatever that needs to look like for when the business gets to a certain capacity. So like that was I would say my absolute biggest mistake. It's the number of people I brought in too early when the business was in its infancy. And I was trying to figure out what the heck I was even doing.
No, that's super valuable. And it talks about like business operations. And, you know, I wonder if the behind the scenes was like you wanted to launch and you wanted to like tell your clients, I have this roster of heavy hitters. Mm-hmm. And versus, you know what? Hey, you've came on. Let me take a step so I can, you know, or like, I think there may be some fear. And I had an agency, so I remember going through something similar where you want to be like, I can start tomorrow, but maybe it's okay to say, hey, it's going to be like 7 days or 2 weeks in order to get everything ready. So then you can get your contractors, your things in place, and it's all after the fact. So anyway, that sounded more like an opinion rather than a question. So maybe the question is this: how do you deal with fear? Fear of like wanting or maybe people pleasing clients because you're new, so you want to act like you're a, like established company. But fear number 2 is, what the heck? I don't have a stable income. Things are jumping. How do you deal with all of that? Because I think the emotional part is just as important as this product market fit and execution.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of sides on like, I'll actually hit the financial because that's much easier from my perspective. And I know that sounds odd, but like, my wife and I'll actually speak very openly on this. When I was working in a marketing director role, I was making 6 figures. My wife was a nurse, was making like it's not 6 figures, but it wasn't a small salary. So like our take home was like pretty significant from a salary perspective of somewhere in like the ballpark of like $200,000 a year. And I then launched my own business and my wife stopped working because that was a choice that we made. And, I've had a pretty significant income increase in the past just 3 years. So like 4 years ago, I was making $30,000 a year, and we had not adjusted our budget for that income increase because I felt like this was a really fast rise. Like this may change, and like I could go get a job, and like I may not have the same level of income. So I didn't go buy a new car. We did buy a new house, but the house was because we moved to a different state. So it was like very standard, like we moved to a different state, we had to buy a new house. But I haven't really increased our lifestyle. What we did with the extra money is we gave more money, we invested more money into retirement, and then we made extra payments on our mortgage so we could pay off our house faster. And then we'll have no debt, and then we'll just be debt free at that point. So that was how we use that extra income. But like when I really do the math on like what I actually functionally need to live to run my household, and I recognize I live in Indiana, cost of living is lower, but like my actual like to live income is like $60,000 a year. So from my perspective, I need one contract that's like $5,000 a month. So what I did before going out and launching this on my own is I ensured that I had closed enough revenue and I had an annual contract that was over that $5,000 a month threshold that had signed for a year. I provided like some bundling discounts. It's like, it's not a small contract for me, but what that then provided me is I know that as long as they pay their invoices, then we're good. And the other thing that I did for the business is I made it a goal to have a $20,000 savings account for the business. So separate from my personal emergency fund, I have a business savings fund that is 20. And my goal is to actually increase that to about $100,000 before the end of the year from a savings perspective, because I want to make sure that I have buffer and margin to pay my contractors on time. If a vendor doesn't pay me on time, I shouldn't put my contractors out. I want to make sure that I always have enough money for my own life that I can essentially put myself on a salary. And then if I have to, and I've already prepped my wife for this, but if I ever have to, we have the cushion in our own life, like our personal emergency fund, that I could skip a paycheck if it means that I maintain a relationship with my contractors. So like for me, it was before I jumped into this full time and it made it public that I was jumping into this full time. I knew what my number was, like very tangibly. What do I need to actually continue to run my life? And then how do I go secure enough revenue? And like, I'll be honest, some of the contracts that secure that revenue are not like scrappy ABM processes. They are just like, I just needed money and I do good work for those clients. So now I'm focused on making sure that everything else is a scalable process, because again, I have an excess to reinvest back into the business to make sure that this is sustainable. Like that's the money piece for me. I think for me, that was the easy part. And I know that sounds ridiculous, but like that's just how you do it. It's like, know what your number is, make sure you have enough money coming in the door, try to secure an annual contract or two that make sure you hit that threshold, and then focus everything else on reinvesting into the business so that it has the capability to scale.
I think that sounds amazing. No, I think that, and it's interesting that for you, I mentioned the word fear. And I think a lot of your answer was cash flow management, right? And, two things. We already had one guest where he literally moved to Colombia, in order to deal with cash flow management. The other situation is we had another guest, same situation. He's like, I'm making $500K, but I have not adjusted my lifestyle above 100. So 2023 theoretically was a bad year, but nothing changed for him because of that. So cash flow management is a good way to deal with fear, imposter syndrome, and things like that, because you're not assuming that this is going to be an immediate success. Gabe, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
For sure. Yeah. So what we like to call that is the come up. So that's the come up, and happy to always hear those stories, right? Mason, I am reading your LinkedIn profile, and the first line or second line says, between a new term, new tools, new strategies, and the ever looming sense of imposter syndrome. I want to know, like, how are you dealing with that? How do you advise people to deal with that? I think, as marketers, we deal with that a lot, right? Just because there's a new, to your point, there's a new term every week. There's a new person who kind of landed at this great gig and it's just like super successful. But then, you start thinking about like what contributions you're making, right? But in the case of you for Scrappy ABM and the way you started, like, how did you deal with that? And how did you feel the confidence to go to market to say, like, this is something that I'm passionate about and can help me fight imposter syndrome?
I think Alex actually touched on it pretty well earlier. Of one of the ways that I tried to combat it was by bringing on really, really heavy hitters. And what was so funny to me is those heavy hitters thought I was the heavy hitter, and they also all experienced imposter syndrome. They were like honored to join the team. And I was like, what are you talking about? Like, I feel like I know almost everything that I know because of like our relationship and what you've taught me. Like, what are you talking? And like, so it's just, that was a really helpful moment for me of, I was trying to battle imposter syndrome by essentially stacking the deck with really, really great talent. But the great talent thought that I was the one that was like, it was just, everybody felt honored and valued in the relationship when I brought them on. And granted, like, again, those people are no longer involved just because the business model changed, and I ended those relationships. That's a horrible way of framing it. We're still friends. We still talk, but like, they're not involved with Scrappy ABM. So we transitioned those out of being involved with the business in and of itself as best we could. That's why I think it's a mistake that I got them involved in the first place, is regardless of how you do it, it's going to damage the relationship a little bit. And I think that's where then I realized, again, what are the things that I have done numerous times and nobody can question me on, because I've just done it so much that like, I know without a shadow of a doubt, I should be an authority on this space. So like, the activation play is something that I think in the past 2 or 3 years, I've built like 100, and I've built that so many times in organizations that I've worked for. I've helped other people build them. Like, I just know what that takes, and nobody else in the market is talking about it or doing it in a way that I am addressing it. So I just feel a really significant level of confidence. And then when it comes to podcasting, like, I've built a show that was in the top 10% of globally listened to shows. And I just know that takes time. And I feel really confident in the ability to build a show that actually has a little bit of an audience, not a huge audience. Like, I'm never going to be top 0.01%, but like a decent enough audience, and also how to generate revenue through a show. So like, those are the things that I'm like, without question, I know how to do. And then honestly, when it comes to building an ABM pilot program, I know a lot, but like my greatest weakness as a marketer, and I feel like I've talked about this fairly publicly, is like, I'm not a paid ads expert. And like so many people think that ABM and ads are like one and the same, which is why it's also funny because I'm scrappy ABM. I don't know how to run ads. I've never done it. It's like not my skill set. So I've then found people that I trust and that I know and that help me with my weaknesses. So instead of like trying to fake it and say to a client, like, oh yeah, I can do everything for you, I'm really, really honest. And I'm like, we have a great playbook. We have a great framework and we can do these things. And like another thing, I'm a horrible designer. If you've ever seen anything I've done in Canva, you would throw up. Mm-hmm. So like, I just know that's not my skill set. So I have a great contract designer that as needed, I can pull them in. So again, it's not, and I think that's the difference of the nuance is like initially when I started Scrappy ABM, I was selling the opportunity to work with specific people. Now I am selling a playbook and a process, and I know what I can crush within my own skill set. I know what the people that are really significantly involved contractors can do in the actual delivery. And then we have people that we've already identified. We know their price points and I can quote it offhand. And like, hey, you need that. Totally understand. It's not like a standard part of our package and our process, but I can pretty easily get that for you if you give me like the ability to send an email. And I'm like, that sounds great. So like just knowing, again, how to build a playbook and a process where you can then very clearly say like this, and this, I've got nailed. We either need to lean on your team or we need to go find additional contractors, which I've already identified, to build the rest of this out. And that's just going to be a cost analysis for you guys.
That's amazing. Mason, so just moving on, as we get to the end of the interview here, I think one of the most important things that we know entrepreneurs altogether, not just solopreneurs, have issues is client acquisition. For you, I think that's another one where you kind of say it has felt easy for you in a sense. Can you talk about your acquisition channels, like what they are, and are they scalable for you? Given and how long did they take for you to create them?
All great questions. I would say that my primary acquisition channel is going to be LinkedIn. And it is primarily because I've been on LinkedIn and posting almost every day for like 3 years. So like, I'll be entirely honest, when I started on LinkedIn, it took about 6 months before I sourced any deals. But now, I have people that say that they've been following me for 2 years and they'll come inbound and say like, hey, I've loved your content. And that is honest to goodness how I get most of my opportunities. For me, the podcast is not actually what I would say a deal source necessarily. Like, unless you think about like someone finds me through LinkedIn, they go listen to the podcast. I do have people that will go and binge the show and listen to like, we've got about 30 episodes out. So like binge the whole show and they're like, this was awesome. So like from that perspective, they will then come in through the podcast in that way. And then the third, and I would say most obvious to me, is just referrals. And again, what I did before I launched Scrappy ABM in a public way, I had kind of identified and gone, and let me reframe that. I'd already launched it publicly before I launched into it full time publicly. I actually sat down with about 50 people in my network and just walked through, hey, here's what I'm doing. Does this make sense? Like, what's your feedback? And essentially from that perspective, did like customer research with people that were in market. And that resulted in two things. One, actually, some of those people immediately converted into pipeline opportunities and wanted to work with us. And some of those people are now clients. And then two, it resulted in a fair number of referrals that were then sent my way. So like that, those are the three things. The two that are obviously from my perspective, the most scalable would be LinkedIn and podcasts, because I put something in and like, I'll make a post and it'll reach, depending on the day, sometimes I'll still only reach like 500 people because LinkedIn algorithm is a thing. But I'll have other posts that'll reach 35,000 people. And that's scalable from my perspective. So I'm actually less concerned about the individual post reach, and I'm more concerned about the habit of like, am I someone that posts and creates content on a daily basis? The podcast, that's the acquisition channel. Like the hardest challenge with the podcast is getting people to listen, but like once they're hooked, they're hooked. And I try to create great content that actually gets people super hooked in. And then the one that is the least scalable is obviously the referral side of things. Because like that's generally speaking, I'm hopping on a call to like meet one-to-one with somebody. But what I found is, again, by creating LinkedIn content, it's a new business acquisition pipeline, but also keeps me top of mind with my existing relationships. A lot of people are referrals through LinkedIn. So again, let me reach out to my network and say, hey, do you know anybody that kind of referral, that's not as scalable, but the just having a presence and being known from my perspective is scalable. That's brand.
Got it. Thank you so much, Mason. Gabe, do you want to kind of bring us home here? Do you have any final questions?
Mm-hmm. Well, that's awesome. Mason, so much. We touched on so much, I think, the business, the learnings, everything else. I think as we wrap this up, we wanted to say we're rooting for you at Scrappy ABM. There's many successes to 2024, but, the goal of this podcast is definitely to give people an insight, advice on what it takes to be a solopreneur. So with everything that you've said, how would you just summarize, hey, if you're going to do this, this is how you do it? And it doesn't have to be one way. It just kind of, whatever you feel is right and resonates.
I think there is again, right or wrong, how I did it is I made sure that the business had cash flow coming in, and I focused for about 3 months. I didn't take any money out of the business, and I just lived on my day job, and I built up cash reserves so that whenever I launched, and then put myself on a salary, because then as long as, again, customers paid in their invoices, as long as I continued to close, I haven't increased my income, even though we've closed a lot more. So I think for right now, if you focus on identifying what are the actual products and services that you sell, and it's not selling the idea of working with a person, it's selling a tangible process or a product, and then just having cash in the bank. I have walked away from quite a few deals, actually. One in particular I really wanted. It was a $50,000 deal. I had only closed 150 at that point. So I was this is 25% of the revenue for the business. But I looked at their contract terms, and they were going to own my business for the length of duration that we were involved with them. They were a multi-million-dollar publicly traded company. And I was I cannot in good conscience do this, because they are going to own me, and they have all the power based on their contract terms. They weren't willing to budge. But because I had cash in the bank and I wasn't dependent on that contract to make rent or to make our mortgage or whatever that needed to look like, I was able to, and they were shocked. They were what do you mean you're walking away? We're who we are, and you're just this small. And I was I don't need this. That's a level of confidence that so many solopreneurs don't have, because they don't have cash in the bank. So again, if you can build up your reserves when you're really relying on a deal and forecasting a deal that then doesn't come through, it's not the end of your business. It's just, that sucks, and you move on. That is my advice. It's just before you launch into it full time, build those reserves, and then just put yourself on a salary. And we're living quote unquote paycheck to, obviously if we needed money, we could pull it out of the business, but I don't want to. I want to reinvest. So recognize that you're probably going to live paycheck to paycheck, quote unquote, for a year or 2 years, so that you can build this into a sustainable thing. Because this is an investment vehicle that will pay dividends if you do it right.
Awesome. Alex, anything else? I know that's a good frame, right? It's maybe
I was he is stoic.
Mason, I appreciate you.
Yeah, thank you.